everyone, it's Sheryl Gottschall here, and today I'm here with hypnotherapist, researcher, author and lecturer Mary Rodwell. So hi Mary.
Hi Sheryl.
I've been very interested in your work for a really long time. Now I know it started back in the early 90s for you, wasn't it?
Yes, it was interesting. I'd just gone into private practice when what was fascinating is by doing that I was getting a lot of different people coming in with, you know, often spiritual experiences where they've had a grief experience or whatever. But what really blew me away was a gentleman that walked into my offices and said, look, I've heard you're open-minded. For this, there's no support groups. For this, they just think you're a loony. His name's Ellis Taylor. He's an author in his own right now and lives in the UK. And what was... I love synchronicity, because the two synchronicities that I had where I picked up two books barely a couple of months prior to that. One of them was Communion, which is the classic with Whitley Strieber talking about his own experiences, and the other one was Abduction by Dr. John Mack, who, for those that don't know, was a former professor of psychiatry at Harvard University. Both of them were from the experiencer point of view. The other one was from a psychiatrist's point of view, where he'd done all the psychological testing. And what he concluded from that, and his later book, Passport to the Cosmos, was that this was a real experience. And it was invaluable for me, because here I was faced with this gentleman who was saying he's having experiences. And what made it even more tangible was that he was talking about his partner and the children all having experiences too. So this wasn't an individual experience, this was a whole family having interactions. And he was waking up with marks on his body, shaved areas, and he said, look, my partner's terrified, our relatives won't come to the house because they're afraid that, you know, they think it's demons and what have you, can you help? Well, of course, the only thing I could do was listen and see if in some way I could help them deal with what was going on by being someone who at least didn't, you know, walk away and say I'm not interested. What I did do, and this was very important in my path, was I was at the Worsley Institute doing advanced counselling, and I took his case to supervision. And I did that deliberately because I wanted insight. You know, was I being misled that this was a reality? Was it in fact someone who was highly fantasy prone? You know, was he hallucinating? Was he schizophrenic? Even if the whole family was having experiences. So I did a really good case study, and I was terrified actually taking it into a more traditional scenario, because you wonder if this sticks. You know, I think Mary's lost the plot. You know, as well. But what was fascinating, they all read it and read the case study, and they all started to disclose strange experiences they'd had. So it was like open sesame, that virtually everyone, except for the uniting minister that was there that didn't say a word, they'd been in haunted houses, they'd experienced spirits. And in fact, you know, the supervisor said, well, enough already, you've yours, but not one said that they thought he was crazy. But what it did for me was, if you can't give me an understanding of this, and what's the point of traditional psychology? Because you're not helping me. So that's when I went to the US and connect with Dr. John Mack's, centre, and also ASSET, which is the Academy of Clinical Close Encounter Therapists. And through that, I started to see there were many others, psychiatrists, psychologists, and nurses, social workers that were working in this field. And that really was the creation of ASSERN, because I decided that if they've got it in America, why can't Australia have a credible organisation with professional support that can offer something to those that are having these extraordinary experiences? So that's a long-winded way of saying how ASSERN got started. Really.
So we're talking about people who've had close encounters here with what?
Oh, now, I would have said at one time just primarily extraterrestrial beings of all different kinds, but I would say that some of them are interdimensional now, extra-dimensional, trans-dimensional, and probably from our future as well. So, whatever.
Yeah. So your ideas have broadened since you first started the work.
Oh, gosh, I mean, I don't even know where I am down that rabbit hole now, and you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Do any of us know? Really?
Whatever.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So, now when you meet people who, and I'm sure there are a few people you might meet who aren't involved in the UFO community, say, what do you do? What do you tell them? Like, do you sort of like to just sort of sidestep a little bit of what you do, or sometimes you think, oh, look, I really couldn't be bothered explaining, you wouldn't get it anyway, like, what do you do?
Well, I say, look, I'm a counsellor, and if they look interested in that, I'll say I help people who have anomalous experiences. And if they actually ask about anomalous experiences, I'll say, well, people that believe they've had encounters with non-human intelligences, and if they show any more interest, I take it down there. But if they stop at that point, it's you know that's enough for them.
Yes,
you know. So I start off very normally.
Yes, yeah. Great. Okay.
I'm sure you do.
All right. Yes, I do. Okay. So, was there a specific point in your thinking, with during your work, where you became convinced that something was actually occurring when people were coming to you and telling you about their experiences? Was there something for you that's like the reality kicked in really fully, truly, utterly,
I think it was a process. I think certainly I was open-minded, and when I saw tangible things like, marks on the body and what have you, and realising it was affecting whole families, I knew then it wasn't imaginative, it wasn't fantasy, because it was affecting a whole family, and it was tangible enough to scare the living daylights out of them as well. So there was emotional trauma, which makes it also a reality as well. And the other thing in that process was that I noticed it changed people. And you don't change after a fantasy, you don't change after a hallucination, but you certainly do change if it's a real experience. And that's the evidence for me. Yes, there are those that have implants that have been examined by Dr. Roger Lear and what have you, and they're very tangible, they're anomalies, there's many strange aspects to them, and that's one part. Missing time, where someone's going on a journey and they find that the journey's taken them twice as long as it should, is another tangible part of this reality. People missing from their beds is another tangible part of this reality. But the most profound, and the one that seems to be the less accepted, is the fact that this changes people. And that is the evidence. To me, it's in your face.
That's not discussed a lot, is it? How the transformational nature of these experiences. I find that researchers tend to want to ask the questions of what did you see, what time was it, how big was it, all this sort of stuff, but they don't actually focus as much on the people who've had the experiences, which you do.
Well, that's the difference, and I think it's very important for people that look for support. They understand the difference between a researcher and a therapist that's working in this field, because our approach is totally different. For the researcher, they're looking for the evidence, they're looking at how big it was, how many people, what's the size of the craft, what camera did you use, or etc., which is and it's vital and it's important. But what they're not doing is then seeing the implications of that, and the implications of the changes that make in someone, whether it's an emotional reaction or trauma or what have you. They're not trained to deal with that. They don't know how to deal with it. They only accept that this possibly happened. But for somebody who's having the experience, they want to understand why. And that's the bit that when I say to people who've been disappointed going to UFO groups and saying, well, they weren't interested or whatever, so they're not trained to be. They're trained, they're interested in the tangible, which they can understand. But you have to go to someone who works in that field to help you process this life-changing experience, and they're not trained to do that. So it's too much expectation to place on someone who's in a UFO group that says, well, I believe you, but I don't know where to go with that, you know. So it's up to the person to say, well, this is what I need now. And many go to UFO groups feeling disappointed because they feel they're just not interested. And that's because they haven't got the skills often as well. And that's why people like yourself and myself have come in, because we're looking at the trauma and the process that comes from having a life-changing encounter or experience.
What are the type of beings that you find that people mostly report in Australia, and do you find there's a difference between the things that people report in this country as opposed to other countries where you've spoken?
That's an interesting question, and what I have found is that initially all that people ever heard about were the greys. That was sort of the major one that people were talking about, and some humanoids like the contactee ones, which we've got a lot more in places like South America, for example. I mean, different types of greys were the standard, of course, and that's what a lot of people thought were the only ones anybody ever saw, as I say, apart from the contactee type cases where they were humanoids or whatever. But what I've discovered is, actually, when people start to talk about their experiences, there are a whole range that are seen by, or you know, in every country. They have different names for them. For example, you know, we know the Aborigines call the manta beings, that I call the mantis or the manta, or and now they are in other countries. They call them the mamu, and the Hosa talk about the mantis beings as the one who teaches, for example. So we know the indigenous tribes are aware of a whole range of different ones, whereas, you know, we're just acknowledging one particular type because that's what's on the telly and whatever. But in fact, you know, there are blue beings, there are, apart from different types of humanoids, light beings, reptilian, different types of those as well, you know, some with flat heads, some with oval shaped heads, tall, short, different colours, different shaped heads, other insectoid types as well. So the range is quite phenomenal, really. But a lot of people think that only they are having this particular type, so they don't realise that other people are having them too until they hear it from somewhere else or whatever. But in popular culture, we're still, you know, it's the greys or the humanoids.
Yes, absolutely.
Primarily, it's just those two.
Yes, yeah, I found that too. Yeah. So, what do you think is, you know, the range of the types of impact, or the range of the impact on people's lives from, say, you know, from here to the greatest impact that happens to them? What sort of starts off first, and what, you know, what's the hardest, strongest, or toughest, or easiest, or best sort of impact for a person who reports a close encounter?
And that's another one that's really great, because a lot of people just believe with this experience that it's the abducted type experience that's highly traumatic, and people, you know, take years to get over the trauma of the fact that they've gone somewhere and been taken by beings that have had no care about them, or you know, or almost robotic. I've worked out with, say, the percentages in a rough way. When I first opened to this with people coming to me, it was generally traumatic, because they were the ones that were really seeking the help. How can I understand this? How can I deal with it? How can I stop them picking me up? All those kinds of things. And there was about 30% of those that initially, now I look at, were the real traumatized ones. Some of them that I found were more traumatized by the not knowing, rather than the fact of something terrible happening. It was, I don't know what's happening, but I know I'm being taken. That's terrifying. For some, it was recall of what was going on, but not understanding it. So I used to liken that to the little boy who's 2 years old. You take him to the doctor and you say, the doctor's a nice man, he's going to make you better. But the little boy sees the doctor, great big needle out, stick it in his backside, and he says, he's a nasty man, not going back there again. It may be till he's 5 or 6 before you can say that contained the medicine that made you better. And what I found by people going into their experience and seeing the scenario, it's not enough to see the scenario. They need to know why. And if you ask the right questions, you can get the why, because some part of them actually does know. And so if you can take them to the place of saying, yes, you're on the table, there's genetic material taken, now let's find out why that's going on and what's that about. And that is just like the little boy who finds out what the big needle was about.
Yes.
It's the same thing. Oh, that was the medicine that made me better. It was scary and it was painful, but I can understand it now. And this is what needs to happen for those that have that experience. It can turn their perspective on their experience on its head completely. And they also find out more about potentially sometimes a cooperation, that there has been some form of cooperation, or something way into, well, for those that are very spiritually inclined, they would see it as a soul contract. And they would, and that is one of the questions I would ask: have you on any level consented? And many of them are actually quite disturbed to find, yes, they did. And I will say to them, well, how does that feel to you? Or how does that resonate? They say, it does, but I didn't realise it was going to be so uncomfortable or whatever. But they will acknowledge it. And it's not for me to judge that. Yes. All I'll say is, if that's how you choose to understand it, then that's how, you know, that's it.
Yes.
You know, if that makes sense to them, that's all that matters to me. Because it's not for me to interpret or explain it. It's their journey to do that. So for them, in other words, the 30% that are traumatised, I may ultimately find only a small percentage, once they've had an understanding, will stay in that trauma. Many of them will move through it and actually change their position. Now for the others, there's the other spectrum. We're coming to this planet, and being on a planet that they see as barbaric is a completely different ball game. They're not angry with the ETs, who they see as their family, because that's their family. They've come down to help the planet wake up. So they are traumatised by humans. They're traumatised by being on a planet that is so primitive and so dense and so uncomfortable and so painful. And they're the ones that say, you know, I really struggle to be here. And many of those will actually do anything to dumb themselves down by taking drugs or alcohol or anything that makes them less sensitive to what they're experiencing. And the majority of those, that 70%, 65-70%, are often the ones that contact me now as well, because they're saying it's very painful being on this planet, Mary. And it took me a while to realise that they were all part of this whole phenomena, that it wasn't just these and, you know, the scary abducted, but it's actually a majority of those that struggle to be here. They're traumatised by humans, and humans scare me, is what they'll say. The way humans behave scares me. And that was a whole new education for me. So I know it's a long answer, but in fact the process, for one, it's about coming to terms with their interacting with beings that they may ultimately see they're genetically connected to or part of a bigger plan. And those that are really struggling to be on this planet, how do I help them to accept the mandate that they've come with something to do? And it's almost like when you've got a child that doesn't want to go to boarding school and they don't like it and they feel quite alien there. It's almost like I feel like mum saying, well, you know what, you did choose it, didn't you? And they'll say, yes. I'm afraid you're going to have to stay in boarding school then for a bit longer. I know it's rough, but in the end, you'll go back home, because what they say is, oh, my home's out there, you know. I don't like it down here. I want to go back to my family. And it's a deep, profound grief that is really hard for them to cope with and deal with. And that's, so my job is really just to support them and say, yeah, it is rough, but you know, there are a lot like you and you're not alone, and you've come here with something to do. What can I do to help you feel that little bit better about what's going on for you? So that's the process. It's huge, and it's different for everyone depending on their perspective.
We were talking earlier about people who you know, are almost keen to have had close encounter experiences, and people who are resistant to it. And you were saying how you feel that people who've had genuine encounters are the most resistant. Can you expand on that a bit more?
Well, it's a favourite with the media. You know, they say, oh, you know, people want to think they've had encounters, it makes them feel different or special or whatever. And do you have some that come that really are just pretending? There's two things that I say to them. First of all, people have flown over to see me from other countries, you know, from the UK, from Malaysia, Italy, whatever. I said, do you think they spend all that money to come over and see me just to convince one person who really doesn't matter that they're having experiences, and spend all that money? I said, it's absolutely illogical, because I'm not going to make them famous. I'm not going to do anything for them other than listen to their story. So that's a nonsense. You know, people come to me, and they come sometimes a long way, because they want understanding. They want to get some idea of what the hell's going on. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I meet hundreds and now thousands of experiences, and a majority of them, particularly those that are coming from a scientific background or whatever, the last thing they want to do is con themselves into believing this reality, because it will change their world. It will change everything they've ever believed. And that's not an easy thing to do. So the most skeptical are these types of people. They will look at something and explain it away if they possibly can. So saying that, the most skeptical are the experiencers. And often some of the researchers I find even more skeptical than the ones having the experience, because they don't want to con themselves. And they also want to prove to themselves they're not crazy. You know, and this is what I think the public really don't understand, that if anything, they're stupidly skeptical. Even when there's really all this high strangeness, they'll say, oh, well, it was this, and or it could have been that, and I'm thinking, for goodness sake, can't you see that doesn't happen like that? You know what I mean? It's almost like I don't want to look gullible in any way, because society is so critical that I've got to be hypercritical, and I think that's what it is. They want to be hypercritical because they don't want someone coming in and saying, oh, well, you're just conning yourself or whatever. And so this whole thing about you want to believe it, it's the absolute opposite. Mm. And you know that very well.
I do.
So I said, can't you see? Can't you
it's
see?
a hallucination. I don't want to know.
Yeah, that isn't a mozzie bite. Sorry, they don't do things like this, you know?
Yes.
Mm. So,
In your opinion, does the gender of the person who's reporting the experiences, does that play a part in those people who have experiences? Meaning that, you know, are there more women than men who report them? Are there more women than men who are having the experiences? Or is it just that women are more open about talking about their experiences?
I think generally it's the third one. It's about women are more inclined to be open about what's going on for them. But having said that, there's something about ufology that men are a lot more comfortable about sharing their experiences. I've had support groups where there's been 12 men and 2 women. And I think it's the only kind of support group, apart from men's groups, where you get more men sometimes in the group than you do women. Because for some reason, this appeals to the gender, in the sense there's a lot more tangibility than, you know, in a spiritual group where it's perhaps a little bit esoteric, whereas they can say, well, I did take this picture of this craft when I went out on my balcony. I did, you know, I did take a picture of this anomaly or whatever, and it helps to make it more concrete. So they will then say, well, if I've had this, then maybe other things have been going on as well. So it's probably the anomaly in terms of these types of groups that you get more men. And my first client was a man, you know. So I think in that sense, but in terms of who are these intelligences interacting with, I don't think, you know, each one is going through a particular family line, particular genders for different things, and they're wanting genetic material from both women and from men. They are doing the teaching on the craft with both women and men and children, and it doesn't seem to make any difference. It's more your family genetics, I think, that make you someone who they're interested in. I don't know if that fits in with your experience, but that's sort of... Yes,
I find that women tend to, I think, are more... it's easier for them to talk about it than men. That's just my experience.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that women are having more experiences than men. That's just the way they report.
Yeah, I just think women are more prepared to step out of the box and say, this is me. But really, in saying that, though, there's more men generally that will finally, because they get so scared and they really don't want to know whether they're crazy or not, that they will actually finally, because they're pushed, come and talk to you.
One of the first things that really struck me when I started doing investigations was that half the people I spoke to who'd had close UFO sightings also reported that they'd had a near-death experience. Have you come across that at all?
I certainly have, and this is where I think it takes us into the realm of consciousness, doesn't it? So many of those would say, look, I've had experiences, but I've also had a near-death experience. Many will say I have regular out-of-body experiences as well as part of that. So I feel like that once you've had this kind of experience, you're more likely to have a range of those other types, you know, and some will be more mediumistic, more clairvoyant, clairaudient, have sense of sometimes even having telepathic experiences as well, and seeing more than the average is on top of it. But near-death experiences does seem to be a catalyst for that awakening for some people, and they will have that, and then they will start to see beings and whatever as well. So there's many ways I think people can open up to this what I call the multi-dimensional nature of who we are. Whether it's that, even a profound grief experience can sometimes trigger that, because they're in such a place that they will start to sense more and be more aware of what's going on, simply because of losing somebody so deeply important to them that they tap into that other side of themselves through that grief process.
Mm-hmm. In Dr. Ken Ring's book, The Omega Project, he talks about, or he actually studied the similarities between people who report close encounters and people who report near-death experiences. And he came to the conclusion that in society there's an encounter-prone personality type. Would you agree with that, or do you have any other thoughts that you'd add on to that? Or
I don't know if I'd call it encounter-prone. I think that your genetics are such that it makes you possibly more able to access another aspect, our multidimensional aspect, more than others, just like some people are born more mediumistic than others, although I think that we can all develop it. Many of us are shut down as children where we may sense and feel things and then told it's not real, so we shut down. But I think this is actually intrinsic to the human condition, that we're all able to access both, and it's a preparedness maybe from a soul level even, that at some point in your life you may have something that triggers that willingness to start exploring the matrix when it's important for that particular soul journey.
Rosemary Ellen Guiley talks about proposes that the alien abduction experience falls under a larger umbrella of the Middle Eastern jinn, and these are beings that exist in a parallel dimension. They can appear as shadow people, they can sometimes appear as wearing cloaks and hats, those sorts of things. Do you have any thoughts on that? Are we looking, where we are in the West, that we're looking at the abduction experience and the close encounter experience through that Western view? And, could it be that there is something, a greater understanding like the jinn that sort of encompasses the whole phenomenon?
I certainly think there are, those kinds of entities as well. And I think when you open up multidimensionally, you're opening up to all the matrix of the non-physical world, and that will be whether you're seeing spirits, whether you're seeing angels, elementals, fairies, the jinn, and all these other intelligences that are out there. Some of them, the tall, bald-headed, black-eyed guys, or blue beings, or whatever. And what seems to be happening, and I talk about this with some of the star kids that have told me that when they're going up on the craft and they're interacting with the different beings they interact with, they are taught what different things are. Like, this is a portal, these are wanderers, and what have you, and these are this. So they're actually given this multidimensional education, and they're shown those that, like the jinn, that will come and they can affect people and even overshadow them sometimes or whatever. So they get to know how to work in that kind of matrix of realities, which we're not educated in our third dimensional reality, and so for most of us it's like that's not real or whatever, and yet we know that they certainly do affect us. And they, lots of children have talked about the shadow beings that they see along with the angels or whatever, and I just think it's all one in terms of a dimensional experience.
In Dr. John Mack's book, Passport to the Cosmos, he studies the cases of three particular people. One is the African shaman Credo Mutwa, which a lot of you would be aware of. There's a South American, I think it was, shaman, and a Native American Indian. And they all had a different view of their close encounter experiences according to their culture. How much do you think our culture actually, which I guess you just answered a bit, but how much, like some of them, because Credo Mutwa sees his experience as an abduction experience and very traumatizing and all that, whereas I think the Native American Indians saw it very differently and positively. How much do you think the cultural background of people affects their perception of their experiences?
It's a good question. I think that it absolutely does. There's no question that those, for example, that have a more conventional religious belief, if they're seeing, what someone with encounters would see as a light being, they'd probably see it as an angel. For someone else, we're seeing a reptilian, would say, you know, this is a demon. So it really comes within your own perspective and your own lens of reality. You're doing your interpretation. So, and also, I tie that in with the soul journey, is that, you know, what is your soul journey this time? Is it to be faced with something so so traumatic that it actually takes you out of your ordinary consciousness into a hyper-conscious, so you can deal with fear? You know, and I know this leads on to a part of the question that you were going to ask when a CERN participated in a thesis by Simon Harvey Wilson. And what was fascinating, that was in 2000, and 5 of my clients were part of the comparison between shamanism and abductions. And what was fascinating, when Simon wrote his thesis, he saw the parallels, that, you know, when they, with shamanism, you're facing your demons, your own personal demons, to operate in a multidimensional reality, and you can't do that till you've dealt with your own fears. It's absolutely identical to the abduction. It's transcending the fear of these strange beings that are taking somewhere and you don't know what to do, and going transcending that into a place where you feel you can actually then communicate with these beings on an equal basis in the same kind of a way. And the transformative effect of both shamanism and abductions is healing abilities, clairvoyant abilities, all the things that we see in terms of transformation is identical between the two. So I call the UFO abduction actually a modern day shamanic experience. And some will need that, but not everyone will. Some of us have reached an awareness that will do it in a more gentle way. Like you get the, you know, the starseeds saying, they're beautiful beings, I've been interacting with all my life, and I feel absolutely they're part of my family. We, you know, everything is beautiful for me. I don't understand this abduction thing. And I'm saying, because for you the journey isn't that this time. You know, your journey, and that's why I think there's such a diversity, because it actually is about the soul journey. Why do some of us have abusive childhoods and some of us don't? It's the same thing, you know, because it doesn't seem fair, does it, that some people have a really rough ride and some of us had great childhoods, you know. Why did, you know, as an ex-nurse, you know, I would see maybe 5 people have an appendectomy, and each one of them will tell you a different experience about the same procedure. And it's exactly the same with everything. You get 5 people in a room and they'll see a particular scenario, and every one of them will have a different perspective depending on who they are. So to me it's absolutely logical that culture and your programming are all part of how you will perceive ultimately whatever the experience is. That's how I understand it at the moment. That could change tomorrow.
Yes, it often does. When you think you've got it, it's just so slippery.
Look, I know, I'm ready for that.
But on the point of shamanism, like with Simon Harvey Wilson, he spoke about how the modern day close encounter, I don't know, it's not modern of course, but the Western view of close encounter experiences is pretty much identical to the classic shamanic initiation experience, in that people are called by the spirits, they're taken away, they're deconstructed, and then they're rebuilt, and then they learn from their experience, and then they come back to their tribe, and then they teach what they've learned. And this is the part in Western society where that last bit's not happening, because the people who've had close encounters, they've got things that they can tell the rest of us, but because of the difficulty in accepting their experiences in Western culture, it actually stops them from finishing that whole process. And for me, I see that's where a lot of people struggle as well. But what's the main message then from your experience, that people, from their experiences, that they would say to you, I've had this experience, I've been through this transformation, I've got this to tell people? What is it that they want to pass on to their own tribe?
Well, first of all, you've made a great point. The sad thing for me in supporting them is that many of them are in families where their whole experience is denied. It's craziness, don't talk about it, don't want to hear it, all this kind of thing. Now, if you've had something that profoundly changes your life and your reality, the way you perceive everything, hypersensitive to a greater reality, and you can't talk about that, it's like having any amazing experience and then, you know, nobody wants to know. So you're isolated, you're alone, you're fearful, you start to question everything. So that, in any ways, having that denied is one of the most profoundly traumatic things I think anyone can do. And I call it, it's a discrimination against personal reality, which I don't think anyone has the right to, because your reality is your reality and you have every right to it, just like I've got every right to mine. And nobody should be able to say to you, that's not okay, or that's, you know, not valid, because they've got no right to do that. But that's what we do in Western society. This is what goes on. And this is where, you know, I'm so I think the thing that hurts me the most is that so many of these beautiful people are stuck. They're diagnosed in some way as mentally ill. They're put on a whole host of medications. Many of them are dumbed down to the point they don't even exist anymore. And this is what we're doing to people who are actually the most aware on the planet. And that's what we're doing. We're actually, you know, dosing them up and sticking them in psychiatric wards, because it's not being acknowledged yet that they're having a reality. And what makes me even more unhappy is I know many of those within the psychological fields have had experiences themselves, but also feel they have to play with the system because they've got no choice. Because at the moment, if they disclose to their colleagues that they're having this experience, then their colleagues will of course think they've lost the plot too. And I've known many of those, I say, within the psychology field that say, you know, here am I ticking off, do you hear voices and whatever, knowing full well I'm hearing voices all the time, and this is part of my experience, you know. So there's this awful dilemma that we are faced with because society still isn't accepting that we're multidimensional. So that's the first. What I have seen is, I know that a lot of will judge this as saying the more you get them to accept the multidimensional reality, aren't you in fact propagating this fantasy that's not going to be helpful to them in society? Because if they choose to continue to believe it, then they're going to be destabilized and la 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 la. I said, no, it's actually the opposite. The more they have a chance to own their experience and understand it and work with it in a non-judgmental atmosphere of acceptance, they actually integrate it in a very healthy way, rather than be constantly in this conflict between, is this real, is this real? I remember a beautiful lady, Jane, she said to me, Mary, when I was a little kid and I had these experiences, I told my mum, she said, there's no such thing. And I spent the rest of my life questioning my reality. And we know that hundreds of thousands, of probably millions and billions of people do the same. Instead of saying, oh, that's interesting, how did you feel about it, you know, and anything else happen? That's all you need to do. And then they'll work through it and decide where it fits in their reality. I have found people become more integrated, they become more balanced. And I said, you know, there's nothing wrong with working on your third dimensional and your multidimensional reality. You know, like we do many jobs, one of us a mother, one goes out to work. They're different roles, they're different scenarios, but we marry them very well. Why can't we marry the fact that we're on one level, we're doing everyday things, mowing the lawn, but we may ultimately be aware there's a being standing there that's giving us some information. Why is that a problem? It's only a problem if you still question that that's a reality and you don't know what to do about it. So it's the conflict that causes the problem in the process. And if you can get to a realization event, which you know takes a long while, the skeptical side keeps coming in, getting in the way. If you can start to trust that, in fact, you become more able and more integrated and more balanced than you do when you're constantly being told you're crazy. That's how I understand it. I'll probably, you know, get bombed for that, but anyway, whatever. You know, that's how I understand. They leave ultimately, once they're ready to go down that rabbit hole, you don't lose yourself. I know it's scary, but you do what I do. You keep jumping onto the next ice floe that says this is reality right now. And you just keep moving and expanding, you know, and people give me the compliment, they say that I always appear very grounded. Well, that's pretty good, considering I'm so far down that rabbit hole, I'm not even quite sure where I am anymore. So I give a good impression, you know, of still being okay. And normal.
On the point of conflict, though, through that transformational process from the moment they start to say, hey, there's something going on here too, where they get right down the other end and go, well, this is what's been happening to me and I fully accept that. There are lots of stones on the road that people can kick their toes on, put it that way. And one of them that I see is that people are very concerned that if they accept their experience, that it's going to, the world's going to go upside down and it's going to change everything and it's going to change them. And I say to them, well, you know what? The way to get through that is to be comfortable with letting that change you. So and so that you can then rise above it and integrate the experience. But the changes that you see in people who report close encounters, what types of changes do you see from through that transformational process?
Well, it is a process, you know that. It may take, for some, they may do it very quickly. Others that may take many years. And I found the ones that struggle the most are usually the heavily programmed right brain, left brainers, should I say, the ones that are the scientists or the lawyers or those in psychology even, that they are programmed into a mindset, as you know, through the process of doing higher education or whatever. So they really do struggle to move over to the right brain that's giving them information and what have you. But when they finally do start going down that rabbit hole and they find themselves accepting their more intuitive side, that's giving them information that they haven't had to work for, which is, all of us is, I've got to think about it first before I get the information, or I've got to read it first, to actually just getting a download of information that helps them to understand something and accept that that's valid, for example. It is amazing how they shift in terms of who they are. Often they change their lifestyle, their diet, they have a new sense of themselves, a sense of purpose, a sense of new direction. They don't even know why they may become absolutely obsessed with a particular subject, whether it's quantum physics or it's anthropology or archaeology, or it may be a mix of all of those. They question everything that they've ever been taught. And that is in itself a big thing to do, because we like to know where our reality starts and finishes, or because it feels safe. This doesn't feel safe because you've got to build yourself up to a new paradigm. But within that, they find that the paradigm actually makes more sense. But they may find that they are guided towards doing healing. They may find that they want to go in live a more rural lifestyle, for example, become more aware of their body and the energies in their body. They will be aware there's a new compassion, a new openness. It is vast in terms of how they change. And this whole shift is becoming aware of what's not right on this planet and how can they help. There is a real sense of purpose and an air of being of service, and a sense they've got something to do. And I want to get on with it, whatever it is, I've got to get on with this. So that they're almost driven by that once they've come to the acceptance that they're part of a greater plan. So ultimately, it is a very beautiful thing to see them open up to that, and where it takes them into a whole new world of understanding their connection to everything, that everything is one. And that to me is incredible. To have that, see that shift in people and see how they becomes, instead of, oh, this is the way it is on this planet, just got to make the best of it, this is, we can do something about this, we can change it, and we have the ability. And there's a sense of, they haven't even yet tapped into what our potential is. So there's a sense of wonder and also a sense of hope. So that's what I see as an outcome for this, if they're ready to go down that rabbit hole and own who they are.
Well, that sort of leads into my next question, which is about Dr. Janet Colley's book, Sacred Encounters, and how that whole transformational experience is a sacred encounter for that person. But could you do you agree on that? And how would you sort of expand on that sacredness of that whole experience, of being this way and going step A, step B, step C, coming out the other side?
For me, it is absolutely sacred. It's the soul journey, because the one thing that I learned from going from nursing to midwifery, where you've got the conventional way of dealing with disease at the end result, to psychology, which says, hold on a minute, we are creating a lot of our illness through stress and what have you. So working with the mind, working with you know, emotions for healing. Then going to that other step where when you do a lot of hypnosis work, you're tapping into the subconscious, superconscious, and then you realize the one driving it is another aspect of them that may not be conscious to them, but is actually driving the journey. And the journey, for many, it seems, is they've come to experience, and they've come to challenge themselves in a range of scenarios that actually act as a catalyst for the next part of their awakening to who they are. And I see that virtually unchallenged with everyone I work with, that they're saying that this is something they've orchestrated, and it is sacred because it's the soul journey. And when they say, you know, they may have had a terribly traumatic experience, and it is so humbling when you say, okay, so where is the part of you that knows what that was about? And many will go to prior incarnation, where they will say, you know, I chose my mum and dad, I chose my siblings, I chose the scenario that I need to grow in this lifetime. You know, whether it's learning more compassion or whatever it is, or learning more about understanding and openness through my own experience where I didn't get it, for example, or through some kind of abuse. If I can see the silver thread in that, then, and transcend that, and so I saw people say to me, well, where's the free will in all of that? And my understanding at this point in time is that we've chosen our pattern, our plan for our life this time, with different red flags that are the ones that kick us up the backside when we don't want to move further. And if we can interpret that in a positive way rather than a negative way, rather as a victim, you know, everybody hates me and whatever. So it's really about our attitude to it is part of the journey. That's the free will. The free will is our attitude, not the scenario, because the scenario is what we've chosen before we came here to kick us up the bum when we've needed it, when we've got stuck or whatever. And through that, when I work as a counsellor, and I've always done that because that's what you do with person-centred counselling, which is the standard, you know, model that you can expand on, is you're finding the wisdom within that person to understand why that has been such a powerful catalyst for them, rather than seeing it as they're all doing it to me. Hold on a minute, what is it showing you that you need to know? Because actually they are teaching you something very, very important. And if people can start to see it from that broader perspective, it makes sense. Because it doesn't any other way, because otherwise you just think everyone's dumping on you and life is crap. So if you can turn it around, then it changes it, and past life work, you know, does the same thing. When they come through and they've died, and they're coming into that awareness of what happened in that lifetime, you can say to them, so what did you learn in that lifetime that was useful to you? Or I learned compassion, or I learned to do without, or I learned to whatever it is. And so did you get it in that lifetime? Yes, but I didn't get this, so I'm going to have to come and work on this next one. You know what I'm talking about, because it's what you do as well. Now that is what makes sense to people, because it's the big picture, rather than we're in this little drama that we can't see is actually conveying to us something larger than that. And that's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Awakening, that's the title of your book. Is it that a new process? Is it pertinent to the times we're living in now, or have people always awakened according to, you know, external experiences?
I think it's all the way through history. Different souls will awaken when they're meant to, and we've had some amazingly beautiful souls that have helped us awaken. You know, for example, Jesus and Buddha and all those beautiful avatars that came to help us at times in human history where we needed a kick up the bum to say, hold on a minute, this isn't about killing one another and grabbing everything you can get. Actually, you know, these are people that you need to start honouring and respecting because they're a part of you. But I think what's happening now is because we've reached a point in human evolution where technology has become so destructive that, you know, a lot of these intelligences that are part of us, because I believe we're all hybrids anyway, and, you know, our families out there, they're saying our children are getting out of hand down there. They're starting, we've given them a loaded gun, and if we're not careful, they're going to go around shooting one another. They're not old enough to have that loaded gun yet. We need to do a quick upgrade so they can realise that actually kills people, and it's not good, and it's affecting us as well. So in that sense, I think when we had the nuclear bomb and all these kinds of things is when we've had so much interaction now. you know, in the skies. They're coming, they're making themselves more and more known, and they are doing what I call a really fast upgrade. That's my sense, because so many now are awakening. And what's interesting is not only is that happening with the adults and what have you, it's also happening in a huge way with the children, and that, as you know, is something that's particularly dear to my heart. But for the adults, it seems to happen at significant times. I've had many in the last few years actually use the word awakening. They're not New Agey freaks, they're not, you know, particularly into metaphysics. Many of them have no particular belief system or whatever, and they may be coming from a very what I would call left brain perspective, whether they're a scientist or whether they're, you know, in law or whatever, and they'll say, I had my awakening 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and it may have been seeing a huge craft that has shaken them to their very roots and started them on a whole new process or whatever. So this awakening that seems to be happening now is certainly going on across the planet, because I've had people, as I say, with different belief systems, different professions, that have been very much in the materialistic kind of way of looking at the world until a significant event like this, where they've just realised through something profound like that, that there's a whole new reality they need to take notice of. So the awakening's going on, but what I'm seeing with the children, and the evidence supports it for what I'm looking at, is the children, each generation of those that, if their parents have had experiences or their grandparents, it seems like each one is an upgrade where they're just more multidimensionally aware to what I call the star kids that are being born now and have been born over the last few generations, that seem to be more able to access their multidimensional awareness by seeing spirits, seeing fairies, angels, seeing all different types of ET type beings, and being aware they're going up on craft, learning things. And what I love about the children and the teenagers too is that their clarity with their experiences, but also reminding the skeptical adults that you see so many of. Understandably, we have to be objective, but they don't see talk shows, they don't read books on this. There's a clarity with the child where they're talking about concepts they shouldn't even know about. When you've got a 7-year-old talking about being given formula to create portals, that's not 7-year-old conversation. 8-year-old talking about black holes and beings that were there before black holes, that's not 8-year-old conversation. Or talking about DNA, that's not, you know, the conversation, because I'm a grandmother and a mother. I know what kids of that age talk about. So my point is they're talking about things and in a profound way that you know is coming from another part of their awareness or whatever. And these kids are coming in now, and that's the awakening. We're waking up to who we really are. That's really what I believe is going on, you know. Yeah. So
you're working on another book now. Is that the content of that book, or what are you including in that one?
The first book really is a resource book, because like you know, there are so many people that have no one to go to talk about this. They don't even know where to start. As Ellis said, you know, there's no support groups a lot of the time. There's no one they know is open enough to this. So the whole purpose of the book Awakening was about providing them a process. How do you know you're not crazy? What are implants? What should I do about the fear? What happens, you know, if you know, I'm having a pregnancy that I think is related to this, or how do I know if my kids are having those kinds of things, answering those questions. And that was what the book was about. But this book is about the children. It's about what the children are saying about their reality, and also teenagers as well, because what they're telling me is about where we're going. It's about our future, and I think that's so exciting. But also balancing it as much with some of the information I've got from certain scientists that say we are changing as a species, that are admitting that we are evolving with different programs, and these different programs, a lot of my research is suggesting, is related to the so-called dysfunctions such as ADHD, Asperger's, some forms of autism, even dyslexia. We've seen these as dysfunctions, but some of these scientists are saying no, it's just different parts of the genome being switched on, which means that they perceive more of reality, and so they struggle to operate in a more limited one. So for example, if we're looking at reality like this, they'd be seeing reality like this and saying, no, that isn't my reality, this is my reality. And one of the ladies who's a scientist in Northern Europe told me that she knows, as she's a letter person, as she calls herself, she said, is that Asperger's stroke ADHD, which she is, and her family, she said even the nerve ends of my fingers, actually I have more on the ends of my fingers than the average human, so I am hypersensitive. I see more colours. And these are the things that we just think, oh, why can't they manage this? Or why, we're getting evidence that autistic children are telepathic. And this is serious research, because parents have told me they believe their autistic child is being telepathic because of things that they've done. Now there is serious research going on to say that some autistic children seem to have telepathic abilities. So if you're telepathic and you're in a normal family and you're aware of everybody's thoughts, how do you function in that? How do you function? Because I can't imagine knowing what you're thinking and what Barry's thinking or anyone else in this room is thinking, and it's all coming in as input. How do you do that? So yeah, they go a bit crazy. I'm not surprised they may get very confused. Nobody seems to get what they're trying to convey or anything like this. And one 16-year-old told me that his reality was so expanded, but nobody would honour it. Nobody accepted that he was seeing what he was seeing and experiencing it. So he said, Mary, I tried to live with their reality. And he said the trouble was when I shut myself down and lived in that reality, he said I wanted to take my life because it was so depressing. I just couldn't handle it. And he said, so it was either, okay, I'm going to kill myself. And this is an 11-year-old, which horrifies me that any kid of even, any age wants to do that, especially at that age. So he said, I thought, well, blow it. The only thing that makes me happy is that greater reality, so I'm going to stay in my greater reality. But, he said, when I go to school, it is so painful, traumatically painful, because he said, I am aware of what everybody is thinking. I can see if someone's been abused the night before, I can feel how they feel. He said, can you imagine what that's like, that you can feel everybody's feelings and emotions around you and try and manage that? This is the sensitivity that these children have, and we haven't yet got a clue of what they're experiencing. I'm wondering why, that they're playing up at school or don't want to go to school or whatever. It's because we don't yet understand. And this is what some of the scientists I know, like again, just some, that are saying, yes, these are the new programs. And this is part of it, and this is the evidence for it. And what I'm trying to do, when parents write to me, they'll say, well, we've had experiences. We've got a child that's, Asperger's or whatever, or autistic. What you're saying makes sense to me. And that in itself is quite fascinating, because they're going to a very unusual phenomena to actually understand their children, which to me is amazing in itself, that they're prepared to go there, because they're saying, look, this is how they describe to me they're seeing spirits or they're and whatever. So I'm seeing the correlations in the letters and emails and from the children themselves. So it really is a new way of looking at what we see as a dysfunction, but actually maybe new programs to show us what our multidimensional abilities are, and we just can't see it yet. But I still don't know if that's correct. It's just a hypothesis, but it seems to be resonating to a lot of people. So I'm just collating. You look for patterns, don't you?
You do.
Because
that's all you can do.
There's no rules here.
Yeah.
So I'm just collating the patterns and trying to understand, and this will all be in the book. It will be about these new patterns and whether or not your child fits into that, and if it does, how maybe you can help, and support them.
Now you've also become involved with a new organisation called FREE, F-R-E-E. So can you tell us a bit more about why that organisation was established and your role in that?
Very briefly, FREE is the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. And the reason it began was because I connected to a lawyer, an attorney of law, of a tax lawyer actually, who saw a huge craft go over the house with his wife and daughter, and saw this energy being come and heal their dog, who was very, very sick. And it was profound for all of them. The neighbours actually saw it as well. For him, it was like, oh my God, there's a whole new reality here. I mean, he was an atheist. He didn't believe in it. His wife is a committed Catholic. And the other lady was attached to the John Mack Institute for a long while, ICAR, and still is that part. But she was communicating with me and Ray, and we sort of coalesced, saying that we really should do something more about this, primarily to put out credible information. Because Ray, being very down-to-earth, grounded lawyer, he said, you know, everything that's out there is all sensationalised and what have you. And I'd seen the latest one in England that was on Close Encounters, and they had done such damage to the people that were part of it that one of the ladies ended up in hospital. And I was saying, it's got to stop. We can't let this happen. We need to put something credible out there now. But how do we do that? And it was, well, we need to bring the science in. We need to show that there is a science that can equate to some of these experiences. Because in the quantum hologram, it's all explainable anyway. I knew Dr. Rudy Shield from meeting him at a special collection of investigators in Newport in 2010. And I knew he was open. And so I connected him to Ray. And then we, from that, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who has his own Consciousness Institute. So the whole idea then in that way was, how can we consolidate this into an organisation which will have credibility? And the only way was to bring as many people in from different disciplines, so that we have, you know, with a multidisciplinary team, and this, we've got MDs, we've got nurses, social workers, certified therapists, and many different creative intuitives that have had experiences. It brought in near-death experiences, it brought in out-of-body experiences, those that believe they're hybrids, those that believe that are walk-ins, really that it's open slather in terms of it's all consciousness. And so the idea is now that when we've got the right package, as it were, with all these different research areas, the academic side, looking at the therapeutic side, looking at the different types and patterns of experiences, and bringing in scientific papers that would support the experience through the quantum hologram, so that, you know, a lot of people who have experiences have downloads of physics and new energies and spirituality, that we can have a way of marrying science and spirituality so that the average person out there can see this has a solid base, that it's not all abstract, that there is a tangibility to it that leads them over that bridge from the third dimensional world into a multidimensional one, and be able to manage that just in the same way you and I have had to do as people working in the field. To actually embrace it, we've needed to understand it from as many levels as we can. And that's what Free is all about. It's giving, it's creating the bridge between the old paradigm, which we know is actually inaccurate, to the one that is more accurate. And I believe it's actually a marrying of the two. I always look at it the left and right hemisphere. That the left hemisphere is all, you know, third dimensional Earth, and the right brain is multidimensional, intergalactic. And what we're meant to do is not dish the left brain any more than we dish the right brain, but actually bring them into harmony, so that we can work in that way, that we're working from feet on the ground, but then working to wherever it takes us. And that's, you know, that's my sort of analogy for how I see Free working, and those that have been brought in. And what's brilliant is that people have really liked that it's really resonating. It's the first time, I believe, such an organisation with that kind of professional backing has ever come together. And I think it's probably because it's just been the right time. I mean, we just got all brought in, don't we? I mean, in a million years, I didn't think I'd ever be lucky enough to be part of something that had that. But I just think we're all just put in the right place, and they say, right, now it's the right time. We can bring everyone in. And what's beautiful is that these with the credentials, and I'm not knocking, and you know I'm not saying they're the only ones that are credible. What I'm saying is third dimensional reality says they're credible. So you have to play the game. But ultimately, what it will do is give it a baseline that wherever you're coming from, a journalist's point of view, or from whatever point of view, you've got someone within that organisation that you can connect with, that will actually help explain what we're all experiencing from a consciousness perspective. And free will do that, I think, or at least we can start producing ultimately documentaries where we've got the science to explain the experience. That's the plan, and that's what we all need. I think we all need the tangibility, don't we? You know, because the more that you get into this, the more you want your feet to firmly planted on the ground. Odd as that might seem, but it's actually the case.
So necessary.
But so necessary for the skeptical experiencer that doesn't want to admit that isn't a mozzie bite. I'm having a go at a friend of mine. She'll know exactly what I'm talking about, and I'll probably get clonked on the head for that.
Okay. Well, one last question, because poor Mary has to talk at our meeting tonight for 2.5 hours, so we've got to give her a break. But one last thing is, if you know, what would be your best advice to someone out there who's isolated and they can't get to see you or can't get to talk to anybody else, you know, can't, what would be the advice you would give them if they're having close encounter experiences?
Well, certainly they can access myself, and all they've got to do is Google Mary Rodwell, and there's information there, and I'd ask them to be informed, which is often the opposite to what used to be said, is don't talk to anyone until you've talked first to somebody. Actually, the more informed you are, the more you can see how your experience marries in with so many others. So it's going to help ground you even more by having that verification. Unless you want to go to a researcher and have it all researched from a unique perspective, and most people, they just want to understand and not be feeling crazy anymore. But there's information right across the board. See what comes up for you, and if you want support and advice, there are organisations like UFORQ here, and Sheryl, for example, has been doing it for actually probably longer than me, thinking about it.
26 years.
There you go, longer than me. So there's, you know, you've been committed all this time. And I can't even imagine how many people you've touched by just being there. And that's the thing, is just talking to a normal person and hearing that they're not judging you is probably the most healing thing of all.
Giving them space.
Just giving them space to say, look, this is how it is for me. And then saying, well, you know, there are lots of others that have similar things. There's books out there, there's information out there, and there are other people that will talk to you too, and the buddies. You know, you can connect them to others that have had experiences as well. So there is support out there. It's just a matter of you owning that it's happening to you.
Well, thank you, Mary. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge with all of us.